Hello everyone, Salam, Adab, Namaste, and welcome to today's event. Today we are going to hear Progressive Urdu Poetry, a joyful re-engagement by Raza Mir Saab, who is Professor of Management at William Paterson University, USA, और मशहूर हैं बहुत सी कुछ किताबें भी इनकी आई हैं जिसमें ख़ास तौर से मर्डर एट मुशायरा काफ़ी इसका चर्चा उसकी हो रही है और ये यहाँ के उर्दू सर्कल्स में काफ़ी जाने पहचाने जाते हैं. Introductory remarks will be given by Professor Muhammad Asim Siddiqui साहब, Professor of English at AMU. ये काफ़ी जाने माने author, reviewer, translator और editor हैं. And concluding remarks will be given by Dr. Mozam Siddiqui साहब, जो आपके लिए कोई इंट्रोड्यूस करने की जरूरत नहीं है आपको, है वो यहाँ के होस्ट. तो वेलकम यू ऑल and let's start with Professor Muhammad Asim Siddiqui साहब. आसिम साहब, रफत हटा लें पोस्टर को. जी आसिम साहब, प्लीज अनम्यूट योरसेल्फ. जी
शुक्रिया बहुत बहुत. अस्सलाम वालेकुम, आदाब. It is indeed a great moment for me to be with you, and I always look forward to these events, and today's event is really very, very special. I have in my hands one wonderful book, and in fact I bought this book about 2 years ago, when in fact I heard so much praise of this book. And in fact I must tell Raza Saab that I was doing a program for Anjuman Taraqi Urdu Hind, and there I was talking about important books which are somehow related to Urdu literature. And there, in fact, I had also scheduled a talk on this book, but then COVID happened and many things actually happened, and then somehow that program was shelved. But this particular thing has been on my mind. So very soon I think I'll resume this work. And it was really pleasure reading this book, and it was a learning experience. I must tell everyone who is present here, many books actually are published, but many, even some good books sometimes sing without a trace. And it was really very, very pleasant thing to learn that Raza Mir Saab's book was widely praised in all reviews. And I have seen its reviews at various places. And it is very unusual for any book to get those rave reviews. So hats off to Raza Mir Saab. And in fact, it is really indeed an honor for me to speak a little bit about Raza Mir Saab, about his various accomplishments. And of course, my job is very limited. I'll be speaking for just 2-3 minutes. We know him as a professor of management. Of course, this is how he was introduced just now. But of course, there is one very important task that he has been performing for the last many years. And that task is introducing Urdu literature, Urdu poetry to readers who do not know Urdu, who read Urdu sometimes in English translation, but they are very curious about Urdu. They are very curious about Urdu poetry. And in fact, there are a number of books devoted to Urdu poetry, various aspects of Urdu poetry, some important canonic Urdu poets, which Raza Mir Saab has written in a very accessible style. And I am using this word in a very accessible style with some emphasis, because I am a student of literary theory also, and I know how sometimes a very simple subject, actually we academics specialize in making simple things difficult. Often we do that. So here I must say that Raza Mir Saab has made difficult things simple by writing some excellent books. And I can just talk about one very important book that was a kind of introduction to Urdu poetry, Taste of Words. And this book was intended to introduce Urdu poetry to readers actually who want to know Urdu poetry, who are curious about it. And two excellent books about two most important Urdu poets, Ghalib and Iqbal. And Iqbal, in fact, this Iqbal book came out recently, and I must tell others here that most of these books have been published by Penguin. Iqbal's book is particularly interesting because Iqbal's personality actually has suffered from so many controversies. So that means Iqbal, whether Iqbal advocated the cause of partition, whether Iqbal was able to wed socialism to his thoughts, and of course, what was Iqbal's relationship to progressive poetry? These are all questions which are very interesting, and you'll see that many of these important subjects are discussed in this book, and especially there's one particular aspect, Iqbal's relationship to socialist thought. That is, and again, this book is a very interesting book, written in a very interesting style. And of course, Ghalib, I am very sure that Raza Mir Saab, Ghalib is Raza Mir Saab's favorite poet. One does not have to be a genius to guess this particular fact, because his Ghalib book, of course, it is also a very interesting book. And I must also say that translating Urdu poetry is an extremely difficult task. Anisur Rahman Saab is present here. And in fact, Anisur Rahman Saab has also written two very interesting books. He has also performed this task recently. So here, Raza Mir Saab has not only translated Ghalib, he has not only translated Urdu poetry, he has also tried to write about many important couplets. He has tried to interpret those couplets, and again, in a very easy to understand language. And of course, I'll say that this book, Murder at the Mushaira, is definitely his magnum opus, because this is one book where you can see the presence of different genres, but still the book is not tied to one particular genre. You can have something of detective fiction here. You can have, of course, kind of biography of a literary culture. And you have so many references to so many interesting details, so many important aspects of 19th century Urdu culture. And here, for those who don't have much idea about this, one very interesting thing is, what does a poet do? And what does a poet like Ghalib do? One can say that Ghalib had great insights into human nature, into human motivations, everything about being human. Now, what is the job of a detective? Detective also sometimes looks for clues, looks for motivation, looks for things. So here, Ghalib performs this kind of dual role. A murder happens. I'm not giving any spoilers. That is bad criticism, which gives spoilers. But I'm just giving you this idea that Ghalib here is a poet as well as something of a detective. And there you have so many other references also to important personages of 19th century. This book, especially its style of writing, and Raza Mir Saab's prose, has been praised in very superlative terms. I can, those of you who would read this, you'll know what it is all about. Now, one very important aspect, of course, of Urdu poetry is progressive Urdu poetry and progressive writers movement. And I can say here with some conviction that our Indian film history would not have been what it is, but for the presence of some very important progressive Urdu poets. You see, when the Indian film industry was at its nascent stage, say I'm talking about 40s, 1931 was the time when, of course, first talkie came about, that was Alamara. But when we talk about 40s, 40s was the period of Dilip Kumar. 40s was the period of some very important filmmakers. It was also the period of Raj Kapoor. It was also the period of course, Dilip Kumar, and of course, Devanand will join with soon. So what actually made these people great? And here, one very important aspect is poetry. So you have all important poets, Sahir, Kefi Azmi, Majru Sultanpuri, And of course, they are coming one after other, and they are enriching the scene. And of course, in later years also, you have somebody like Javed Akhtar. And in between, there are so many names. I will say that Raj Kapoor's aesthetics would have been very different, but for Khwaja Ahmad Abbas. So here, this is one very important subject, progressive Urdu poetry. What has been its role? Its critics say that all progressive Urdu poetry looks alike. Whether you read Kafi Azmi, or you read Janisar Akhtar, or you read sometimes Majrooh Sultanpuri, there is a particular kind of tone and tenor there, the particular kind of imagery there. And I'm sure Raza Mir Saab will address this question also in this. So without taking much of your time, I must leave the stage for one very important lecture. And I welcome Raza Mir Saab to this very important platform which Raziuddin Saab has provided to Urdu poetry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Asim. It was most generous and काफी शर्मिंदगी हुई आपके introduction सुनते हुए, but I accept it with a lot of humility. I'm sitting in front of very, people who I respect a lot: Anis Sahib, Shahid Sahib, Muazzam Sahib, Razi, all these people and others who are stalwarts in the field. So I just want to begin by reiterating what this talk is not. This talk is not a history of progressive Urdu poetry. Uski wajah ye hai ki that talk has already been done in this forum. In February 2022, Rakshanda Jalil Sahiba had done a very competent history of Urdu progressive poetry. And give me a second, I'll be speaking, but I'll keep my video off. I had the honor of giving the concluding comments on that. And I was able to listen to her, and she gave a very good analysis. So the formal part of it is already there. ये बात है. दूसरी बात ये है कि the reason for this, and I called it a joyous re-engagement for two reasons. One is कि जब वो खत्म हुई talk, so then there were a lot of people, we had a lot of Q&A, and I realized that the audience was extremely sophisticated and they knew a lot about Urdu poetry. और मैं चाहता था कि एक forum हो कि वो लोग फिर अपने तासुरात about progressive Urdu poetry बयान करें. So that's why the re-engagement. And I want to keep it joyful. I want to keep it light. I want to recite poetry, not say a whole lot myself. There are a few new people here. I'll speak in English, but I will beg your indulgence that I will not translate all the poetry. I will only translate अगर मुझे कोई निशानदेही करनी पड़े, क्योंकि otherwise the time is wasted. And I have kept the talk very unstructured. I have prepared very little for it. But one thing I will do is adhere to time. So I will be done about 40 minutes from now, if not earlier. So to make a quick beginning and to connect my comments to Asim's, Asim had mentioned that Allama Iqbal was one of the people who began to engage with progressive ideas. And of course, you can say that there's a huge prehistory of progressive Urdu poetry. People like Ghalib and Mir also were completely breaking down the barriers of tradition. Lekin ye jo direct engagement with capitalism, shayad Iqbal ke waqt se shuru hua. So we all know, and I hope that each piece of poetry that I read, that I declaim, will be something that will strike a chord in you. कि आप सबको पता है कि Iqbal had written this lament by Lenin in the court of Allah, which basically ended by saying, "Tu khadiro amil hai magar tere jahan mein hai talq bahut bande mazdoor ki awqat." And then in Iqbal's words, Allah responds with the famous nazm ke utho meri duniya ke garibon ko jaga do. Or काखे उमरा के दरो दीवार हिला दो. And the share that really consumed the progressive was के जिस खेत से दहखां को मयस्सर न हो रोजी उस खेत के हर खोशे गंदुम को जला दो. Now, just as an aside, the progressives first fell in love with Iqbal and then they fell out of love with Iqbal. They thought of him as a reactionary, and Sahir Ludhianvi gave words to their anger against Iqbal, saying कि जिससे दहखान को रोजी नहीं मिलने पाती, मैं न दूंगा तुझे उस खेत जलाने का सबक. वो फसल बाकी है तो तकसीम बदल सकती है, फसल की खाक से क्या मांगोगे जमहूर का हक. It is like a little pricking at Iqbal. Habib Jalib connected a little better. He said कि जब लोग उठते हैं, जब लोग आते हैं जब तेरे गरीबों को जगाने, सब मुल्क के जरदार पहुंच जाते हैं थाने. Their connection with Iqbal always remained. Now, 1936, the Progressive Writers Association was formed. 1936 was a very interesting year in the history of the subcontinent. At that point in time, the understanding of socialism was becoming more and more mainstreamed. And it was a right thing at the right time. The Urdu literary world, not the poetic world, had already been hit by the Angare controversy, where a particular set of short stories written by a group of young people had been very badly condemned by the religious establishment. And they were not only unrepentant, but they were like, okay, we are going to give you, tumhe muh tod jawab denge type. So in 1936, this association is formed there were a lot of Urdu literary figures and Urdu poets, but they were joined with Hindi poets and Bengali and Telugu and Tamil and others. The association started in 1936 and took off. So if you look at just the year 1936, I went back and checked. Firaq Gorakhpuri must have been 42 years old. Josh Malihabadi would have been 38. Makhdoom was 28. Majaz was 27. Faiz was 25. Moin Jazbi was 24. Ali Sardar Jafri was 23. Janisa Akhtar was 22. Majruh and Kaifi were both 17 years old. And Sahir was only 14 years old. But these all were people who were quite ripe to grab the ethos of the movement. And we are going to, since I have taken all these names, I'll just take one share from each one of them. Firaq had said, for example, about the notion of time in revolution, ke dekh raftare inqilab firaq. Dekh raftare inqilab firaq, kitni ahista aur kitni tez. Josh was writing these things about the East India Company, I mean, the British government, he called it East India Company के फर्जंदों के नाम, और वो नज़में बड़ी तवील होती थी और काफ़ी हार्ड हिटिंग होती थी कि किस ज़बान से कह रहे हो आज ऐ सौदागरों दहर में, because what was happening at that time was that the Indian working class was being asked to join the war, because after all, Hitler is such a bad guy. So he's making fun of them. कि किस ज़बान से कह रहे हो आज ऐ सौदागरों दहर में इंसानियत के नाम को ऊंचा करो, जिसको सब कहते हैं हिटलर भेड़िया है भेड़िया, भेड़ियों को मार दो गोली पे अमनो बखा, बाग़े इंसानी पे चलने ही को है बादे ख़ज़ां, आदमियत ले रही है हिचकियों पर हिचकियां, हाथ हिटलर का है रक्शे खुदसरी की बाग पर, तेग का पानी छिड़क दो जर्मनी की आग पर. और सख्त हैरान हूं कि महफिल में तुम्हारी और ये जिक्र नौ इंसानी के मुस्तकबिल की अब करते हो फिक्र. जब यहाँ आए थे तुम सौदागरी के वास्ते, नौ इंसानी के मुस्तकबिल से क्या वाकिफ न थे? हिंदियों के जिस्म में क्या रूह आज़ादी न थी? अरे सच बताओ, क्या वो इंसानों की आबादी न थी? वो अपने जुल्म बेनिहायत का फसाना याद है? कंपनी का भी वो दौरे मुजरिमाना याद है? लूटते फिरते थे तुम जब कारवां दर कारवां, सरबरहना फिर रही थी दौलते हिंदुस्तां, दस्तकारों के अंगूठे काटते फिरते थे तुम, सर्द लाशों से गढ़ों को पाटते फिरते थे तुम, सनत हिंदुस्तान पर मौत थी छाई हुई, अरे मौत थी कैसी, तुम्हारे हाथ की लाई हुई. We could go on and on, but you get the general gist that this was not your old-fashioned mushaira poetry. This was entirely something else. And while it was very realist in its thematic, in its poetic structure, it still was quite tradition. आपको रदीफ, काफिया, वजन, बहर की बहुत fidelity मिलेगी इन लोगों के उसमें. And Majaz, of course, was a poet that comes once in every generation, right? So he wrote about, capitalism, and we'll come back to Majaz a couple of times, but he also wrote about the extraordinary alienation of people when they are, should I say, alienated from their labor and from the surplus value. बड़ी poignant सी नज़में हैं कि शहर की रात और मैं नाशाद नाकारा फिरूं, जगमगाती जागती सड़कों पे आवारा फिरूं, गैर की बस्ती है कब तक दरबदर मारा फिरूं, ए गमे दिल क्या करूं, ए वहशते दिल क्या करूं. Everybody knows. And then it kind of goes into deeper poignancy, and the metaphors become very weird, right? कि एक महल की आड़ से निकला वो पीला माहताब, जैसे मुल्ला का अमामा, जैसे बनिए की किताब, एंड देन जैसे मुफलिस की दवानी, जैसे बेवा का शबाब, ए गमे दिल क्या करूं. फिर उनको गुस्सा आ जाता है, जी में आता है ये मुर्दा तारे, चांद तारे तोड़ दूं और बढ़ के इस इंदर सभा का साजो सामा तोड़ दूं. I mean, that I can only imagine how it must have fired up an entire generation. Jazbi sometimes, is not remembered as much as these guys, but he favored engagement rather than observation. ऐ मौजी बला उनको भी जरा दो चार थपेड़े हल्के से, कुछ लोग अभी तक साहिल का तूफान से नजारा करते. So these were people who were just putting out a new aesthetic. And I want to take a brief moment. I'll come back to Ali Sardar Jafri and others. But when I came to the United States in 1993, I went to a conference. And in the conference, it appeared that, this is the first time I'm seeing people talk about Urdu poetry in an academic setting. तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि there has been a set consensus, particularly among academics working in the United States, that the progressives were poor quality poets, that they had no aesthetics, that if you wanted to go to real poetry, either you went to the classics or you went to the Jadidiyat, like Noon Mim Rashid. ये सब सारे pamphlet, ये सब लोग pamphlet लिखते थे, और so that is the beginning of my engagement, that aesthetic experiment should not be coded as aesthetic failure. It's very important. People make very, very strong choices about what to do with their poetry, and these people, उनके पास इतनी खुदरत थी कि वो जो चाहे कर सकते थे अपने अल्फाज के साथ. And what they did with it was a representation of their desires and perhaps certain decisions that they took collectively. इसमें कोई शक नहीं है कि at some point in time, the deep hegemony of the progressives in the Urdu poetry circles led to some silly things. And we can talk about them too, but that is not what I wish to highlight. So Ali Sardar Jafri. To connect Ali Sardar Jafri to the progressives, I'll take you to the furthest point. One day, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1990. By that time, many of these poets had either passed away or they were old, they were not engaging. Ali Sardar Jafri was. And he wrote this most poignant anthem, which I remember reading actually in a newspaper in Hyderabad. Ke Alvida e surkh parcham alvida, e nashane azme mazlumane alam alvida. Dide purnam ne kal dil se kaha tha marhaba, आज लेकिन कह रही है चश्मे पूर्णम अलविदा. और रम्स गाहे खैर व शर में याद आएगी तेरी, हूँ मैं अब और लश्करे इब्लीस आलम अलविदा. I think इब्लीस आलम was United States, I'm not sure, but maybe the global capitalism or whatever. So these people were all, engaging at various stages. They were engaging when they were winning, and they were also engaging when they're losing. Janisar Akhtar, codes the separation of lovers with the movement. कि भूले न किसी हाल में आदाब नजर हम, मुड़कर न तुझे देख सके वक्त सफर हम, और जीने का हमें खुद न मिला वक्त तो क्या है, औरों को सिखाते रहे जीने का हुनर हम. Majruh was, Majruh kind of dampened down his revolutionary ethic when he became more and more successful as a film poet. But as Asim was saying, they always pushed it in. They leavened it very well. But when he used to write non-filmy poetry as a young man, he was quite fiery. रोक सकता हमें जिंदा ने बला क्या मजरूह, हम तो आवाज हैं दीवार से छन जाते हैं. और famously, मैं अकेला ही चला था जानिबे मंजिल मगर, लोग आते ही रहे और कारवां बनता रहा. I hope everybody is kind of, having some flickers of recognition. I'm sure they are. Kaifi is a good example of that aesthetic experiment. He's writing about workers, right? Workers and what it means to them to produce value and not participate in its distribution. मजदूरों के बारे में लिखे थे कि आज की रात, मजदूर कह रहा है, आज की रात बहुत गर्म हवा चलती है, आज की रात न फुटपाथ पे नींद आएगी, सब उठो मैं भी उठूं, तुम भी उठो तुम भी उठो, कोई खिड़की इसी दीवार में खुल जाए. What did the worker do? So he says, we caused evolution and we caused progress. ये ज़मीं तब भी निगलने लेने पे आमादा थी, पाँव जब टूटती शाखों से उतारे हमने, उन मकानों को खबर है न मकीनों को खबर, उन दिनों की जो गुफाओं में गुजारे हमने. हाथ बढ़ते गए सांचों में तो ढलते कैसे, हाथ ढलते गए सांचों में तो रुकते कैसे, नक्श के बाद नए नक्श निखारे हमने, कि ये दीवार बुलंद और बुलंद और बुलंद, बामुदर और जरा और संवारे हमने, और आंधियां तोड़ लिया करती थी शम्मों की लवें जड़ दिए इसलिए बिजली के सितारे हमने. एंड देन व्हाट हैपेंड कि बन गया कसर तो पहरे पे कोई बैठ गया, सो रहे खाक पे हम शोरिश तामीर लिए, अपनी नस नस में लिए मेहनत पैहम की थकन, बंद आंखों में उसी कसर की तस्वीर लिए. एंड नाउ द रेवोल्यूशनरी वॉइस साउंड्स, दिन पिघलता है उसी तरह सरों पर अब भी, रात आंखों में खटकती है सिया तीर लिए, आज की रात बहुत गर्म हवा चलती है, आज की रात ना फुटपाथ पे नींद आएगी, सब उठो मैं भी उठूं तुम भी उठो तुम भी उठो, कोई खिड़की इसी दीवार में खुल जाएगी. Now it is entirely up to you to see this as not that great poetry, but I think I would like to say that maybe it doesn't say that much about the poetry, but it also says something about you. So we were a bit, in your face about this with some of the academic establishment. And finally, I want to say these are all the classical ones, right? So we come to Sahir ka Taj Mahal hai aur ye sab hai, but Sahir as a progressive gave voice again to the defiance of the progressive poet कि भड़का रहे हैं आग लबे नगमगर से हम, भड़का रहे हैं आग लबे नगमगर से हम, खामोश क्या रहेंगे जमाने के डर से हम, और ले दे के अपने पास फकत एक नजर तो है, क्यों देखें जिंदगी को किसी की नजर से हम, और माना इसके इस जमी को न गुलजार कर सके, कुछ खार कम तो कर दिए गुजरे जिधर से हम. तो ये सब आए, ये काफी हेजेमोनिक हुए, and during that point in time they produced a corpus of work that will form a very important chapter of the history of Urdu poetry. So now what I want to do very quickly is to take a few themes, because when I had given my concluding remarks in Rakshanda Jalil Sahiba's talk, I had said that the progressives, whatever you might say, they were on the right side of history. They were always on the right side of history. The movement was profoundly anti-capitalist. Now that history will judge whether that one was it or not. But they actually talked about, the contradiction between labor and capital. Now, insan pe ye sarmaya o mehnat ka tazad, Sahir says. So they were anti-capitalist. They were anti-colonialist. They were very strong in the freedom movement. They wrote about, Gandhi and Nehru and the Bardoli movement. And I don't want to only talk about the most famous poets. My father used to quote a poem by a poet who I never read this. I only heard this from my father's voice. And it was making fun of the British. Bacche padhte the, making that, in Urdu, there is this thing called Sufed Khoon, कायरता की अलामत, कि ये कोट भी सफेद, ये पतलून भी सफेद, तेरी सफेद हैट का है ऊन भी सफेद, खुद जिस्म भी सफेद है और इसके साथ साथ मैं तो ये जानता हूं तेरा खून भी सफेद. So, they were seeding various elements of the people with the idea of freedom, the lovely dawn of freedom. And unfortunately, freedom then came. And freedom came, and it was not the freedom that we hoped for, because very quickly there was partition. So everybody remembers Ye Daag Daag Ujala by Faiz, Ye Shab Kasida Sahib. And that one line is such a heartbreaking one, right? Ki wo intezar tha jiska, ye wo seher to nahi. तो खैर आप लोग बखूबी वाकिफ हैं, तो I would like to talk about other ones. कि Sahir had written Mafamihat, कि ये जश्न जश्न मसरत नहीं तमाशा है, नए लिबास में निकला है रहजनी का जुलूस. Beautiful poem. And then our Josh again returns classic, कि शाखें हुई दोनीम जो ठंडी हवा चली, गुम हो गई शमीम जो बादे सबा चली, अंग्रेज ने वो चाल बजोरो जफा चली, और बरपा हुई बरात के घर में चला चली, अपना गला खरोश तरन्नुम से फट गया, तलवार से बचा तो रगे गुल से कट गया. और सिख ने गुरु के नाम पे बट्टा लगा दिया, मंदिर को बरहमन के चलन ने गिरा दिया, मस्जिद को शेख जी की करामत ने ढा दिया, और मजनू ने बढ़ के पर्दे महमिल गिरा दिया, एक सूए जन को गलगलाए आम कर दिया, मरियम को खुद मसीह ने बदनाम कर दिया. And it goes on, and sometimes it goes on to be very specific. These guys who used to be ICS officers, essentially working as British toadies, they all became big shots in India and Pakistan. So he said, बरतानिया के खास गुलामान खानाजाद देते थे लाठियों से जो हुब्बे वतन की दाद, एक एक जर्ब जिनके है अब तक सरों को याद, वो ICS अब भी है खुद बख्शो बामुराद, और शैतान एक रात में इंसान हो गए, जितने नमक हराम थे कप्तान हो गए. So, and it goes on and on. In the end, the flourish comes कि वो ताज़ा इनकलाब हुआ आग पर सवार, वो सनसनाई आंच, वो उठने लगी शरार, वो गुम हुए पहाड़, वो गलता हुई गुबार, ऐ बेखबर वो आग लगी आग होशियार, and so forth. So that was the laments of partition. The best laments of partition come from the Urdu poets. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about atheism, because देखिए Urdu poetry में there's always been a tradition of people making fun of the pious. वाइज का मजाक उड़ाया जाता था, मुल्ला का मजाक उड़ाया जाता था, और कभी कभी तो खुदा का भी मजाक उड़ाया जाता था, in the classical poets. But these guys, they took it to the next level, in which they actually talked about atheism as an idea. And they wrote it in the most beautiful poetry, right? And Urdu, it's nice, it's kind of cute because all Maulvis talk in Urdu. So you hear things like, let me share one or two that I remember. Majaz to, of course. एक उनका पूरा है, जिस तरफ देखा न था जिस तरफ देखा न था अब तक उधर देखा तो है. I translated that in the book that Asim mentioned. But he was like, दैरो काबे का मैं नहीं खायर, दैरो काबे को आशियां न बना, मुझ में तो रूह सरमदी मत फूक, रौनक बज़्म आरिफा न बना. And Sahir writes, conflating religious ideas with capitalism, and therefore freedom from capitalism with atheism. कि सయ్ये बक़ाए शौकत अस्कंदरी की खैर, माहौल किस्त बार में शीशागरी की खैर, बेजार है कनिष्त व कलीसा से ये जहां, सौदागराने दीन की सौदागरी की खैर. और the most interesting share in that particular nazm was कि इंसान उलट रहा है रुखे ज़ीस्त से नकाब, मजहब के एहतमाम फसूं परवरी की खैर, और इल्हाद कर रहा है मुरत्तब जहान नौ, इल्हाद कर रहा है मुरत्तब जहान नौ, दैरो हरम की हैलिया गारत करी की खैर. The idea that, this business of atheism was creating a new world, they really did a lot. They really did a lot to kind of take the air out of pompous religiosity. And, we wish there were more of them now, but there are quite a few even now. And I count my uncle SM Shahid, who might be here. I don't see the list, but as one of them, उनकी शायरी बड़ी तंजिया है मजहबी practices के ताल्लुक से. So then we come to the issue of women and feminism. And now you must have also picked up on the fact that all these people we have talked about so far are men. So I'm not 100% sure whether there simply were not forums available for women to express themselves. Later, a lot of people who I associated with progressivism, like Ishwar Nahid, Ishwar Afreen, Fahmida Riaz, and others, talked about feminist ideas. But before that, these men also, they expressed a lot of solidarity with women, right? कैफी ने कहा था कि क़ल्ब माहौल में लर्ज़ां शर्रे जंग है आज, हौसले वक्त की और ज़ीस्त के एक रंग है आज, आब गीनों में तपां वलवलाए संग है आज, हुस्न और इश्क हम आवाज़ व हम आहंग है आज, उसकी आज़ाद रविश पर ही मचलना है तुझे, उठ मेरी जान मेरे साथ ही चलना है तुझे. Very very beautiful poem with many verses, and of course आपके नजरों से ये सब गुजरे हैं. और मजाज तेरे माथे पे ये आंचल बहुत ही खूब है, लेकिन तू इस आंचल से एक परचम बना लेती तो अच्छा था. And they always spoke, and they never were smarmy. That's so nice about the progressive. ये मतलब they were never vulgar, they were never obscene. They certainly did not, all this, the lips of the beloved and the Zulf ki qam, ye sab, they just ignored and moved all along. But then the women came and began asserting themselves. And not only was there, this is the first time the women began to push for a new aesthetic. So they didn't necessarily write in the rhyme meter tradition. उनकी आज़ाद नज़में बहुत अच्छी थी कि ये हम गुनहगार औरतें हैं, किश्वर नाहिद कहती हैं, ये हम गुनहगार औरतें हैं जो अहले जिब्बा की तमकिनत से न रोब खाएं, न जान बेचें, न सर झुकाएं, न हाथ जोड़ें. इशरत आफरीन बहुत छोटी सी नज़्म है. आई एम सेइंग इट, 3 लाइन की नज़्म है कि मेरा कद मेरे बाप से ऊंचा निकला और मेरी माँ जीत गई. See, it's so wonderful. just short and hits to the point. And then, of course, they began to venture from their feminist positions into geopolitical discourse. When the Indians began to get belligerent from the nuclear front, Fahmida Riaz, who was a critic of Pakistani ultra-nationalism, writes to the Indians कि तुम बिल्कुल हम जैसे निकले, वो मूर्ख था वो घामड़पन, आखिर पहुंचा द्वार तुम्हारे, प्रीत धर्म का नाच रहा है, सारे उल्टे कार्य करोगे, तुम बैठोगे सोचा करोगे कौन है हिंदू कौन नहीं है, एक चाप सा करते जाओ कितना वीर महान था भारत. So these people are really very important, and there are many others that who took this tradition forward. मैं अपने talk को समेटना चाह रहा हूँ क्योंकि I want to give more time for both the concluding remarks and for discussion. So now we come to the new progressives. I remember in the 1980s when I was at a small mushaira in Hyderabad, there was a poet from Calcutta, Munawwar Rana, who had come. And उन्होंने महफिल ही लूट ली थी कि उनके भी बड़े सादा अल्फाज हुआ करते थे कि मैं हूँ मेरा बच्चा है खिलौनों की दुकान है इस वक्त मेरे पास बहाना भी नहीं है. You know, just put very simple situations about what it means to be poor in the world. And then, of course, came Javed Akhtar. Javed Akhtar by now is a colossus, particularly because he is known in different genres. कि मेरी जिंदगी मेरी मंजिलें मुझे खुर्ब में नहीं दूर दे, मुझे तू दिखा वही रास्ता जो सफर के बाद गुरूर दे, वही जज्बा दे जो शदीद हो खुशी तो जैसे कि ईद हो, कभी गम मिले तो बला का हो, मुझे वो भी एक सुरूर दे, तू गलत न समझे तो मैं कहूँ तेरा शुक्रिया के दिया सुकून, जो बढ़ के बने जुनूं, मुझे वो खलिश भी जरूर दे, और मुझे तूने की है अता ज़बां, मुझे गम सुनाने का गम कहाँ, रही अनकही मेरी दास्तां, मुझे नुत्क़ पर वो उबूर दे, और वो जो जुल्फ तेरी सुलझ गई, वो जो थी कभी तेरी धज गई, तुझे मैं संवारूंगा जिंदगी, मेरे हाथ में वो उमूर. सो उसके बाद आजकल कई नए शोरा आ गए हैं मंजर पे. I can think of Iqra Khilji, I can think of Hussain Haidari और आमिर अजीज और इवन वरुण ग्रोवर जो कागज नहीं दिखाएंगे वाले. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि the progressive tradition is gone. The progressive tradition always lives. Indeed, there was a brief moment of a few decades when it became hegemonic, but it lives on. And I want to stop by invoking a non-progressive poet, a pre-progressive poet, वली दकनी. उन्होंने कहा था कि राहे मजमून ताज़ा बंद नहीं, ता क़यामत खुला है बाब सुखन. एंड मैं समझता हूँ कि प्रोग्रेसिव राइटर्स का भी बाब सुखन ता क़यामत खुला रहेगा. लेकिन जो गुजरी है, खुसूसन 1940 से 1990 तक की जो अर्धशती है गुजरी है, उसे हमें सराहना चाहिए. एंड आई रियली थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर आपकी समातों के लिए, और मैं अब मौज़म साहब के कमेंट्स का इंतजार करूंगा. शुक्रिया.
तो बहुत यानी अल्फाज नहीं है. रज़ा मीर साहब का जो प्रेजेंटेशन था, आपने एक समंदर को कूजे में बंद कर दिया है. और एक इनकी टॉक सुन के you probably got an idea about the book that Dr. Asim Siddiqui was talking about. And Raza Sahab was introduced to me. I haven't met him personally yet, but I know that we have as good as, met each other, because his uncle, my very dear friend, Dr. Shahid, has been talking about him and has been sharing, his writings and his ideas and everything. And so I am quite familiar with Raza Saab. Let me begin by extending the horizon into the past a little bit more. And I would like to talk about the greatest representative of the Indo-Persian style of poetry, the Indian style of Persian poetry. And his name is Mirza Abdul Qadir Bedil, Azimabadi Summa Dehlavi, who is known as a great Sufi poet who expounded on the philosophy of Advait, non-duality, and Wahdatul Wujud, the unity of being. And but in his poetry, there are also a lot of progressive ideas which apply to the progressive writer's poetry also. And on account of these ideas, Bedil became extremely popular. Among other things, Bedil became extremely popular on account of these progressive ideas in the Soviet republics, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and other countries. And ironically, he was unknown in Iran until some people wrote PhD thesis, and some poets also, great progressive writers of Iran, used Bedil as a guiding post. So let me just read some poetry of Bedil. Dastgah-e ghurur sultani, sarzad akhir ze ijz dehqani, josh fir'aun o shokhi namrud, har taraf bal iqtidar gushud. The power and arrogance of the great sultans struck at the modesty and helplessness of the peasantry, and the arrogance of Firaun and the mischief of Namrud spread its wing of exploitation all around. And then Chun Tama Tir Bar Kashad Ghilaf Nistanja Shahid Juz Insaf. So when the sword of greed came out of its sheath, everything other than justice became a victim of that oppression. And then Bedil pays tribute to the profession of peasantry. Neest Shayane waze insani, hurfati behze waze dehqani. No other profession or trade is worthy of being the topmost profession of humanity than the profession of peasantry. And talking about the oppression and exploitation of the peasantry, so Bedil says, Har koja hasili nishan dadan, hamshu murash be khirman uftadan, har koja mazra'i siyahi kar, hirse afwaj barq rahi kar. Wherever the crops appeared, like the locust, the armies struck the standing crops. And also I would like to say that yaft as dast burde in ajlaf, hirse afwaj barq rahi kar. So from the destruction of these armies who descended like locust, the greed of the armies. They subdued them with their swords. And then he says, Yaft az dast burde in ajlaf, jebe har dana sad hazar shigaf. From the tyranny of these tyrants, the bosom of each seed was pierced by 100,000 holes. So these are, I thought that I should introduce some ideas expressed by Bedil, because Bedil's time was 1642 to 1720. So more than a century and a half before these ideas, progressive ideas, appear in Urdu poetry. And on account of these ideas, Bedil became extremely popular in the Soviet, as I said, Soviet Asian republics. And also, I would like to mention very briefly Faiz Ahmad Faiz, who also, pays a glowing tribute to the peasant. And he says, Badshah Jahan, Waliye Ma Siwa, Naibullah fil ard, दहका के नाम, जिसके डोरों को जालिम हका ले गए, जिसकी बेटी को डाकू उठा ले गए. So it goes on and on. So I think I would like to leave more time for discussion and question and answer. And Professor Anisur Rahman Saab is with us, so I'm sure he would also like to, say a few things about today's topic. And so over to you, Razi Saab.
जी बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया मौजम साहब, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आप तीनों हजरात का, रजा साहब, वंडरफुल टॉक. एंड फिर से बहुत सी चीजें याद आ गई, ताज़ा हो गई. हम लोग भी वी आर द चिल्ड्रन ऑफ दैट, जो ग्रूम हुए उसी माहौल में, तो सब बचपन से याद आ गई बहुत सी चीजें. और इट इज रियली सो नाइस, सच अ नाइस टॉक. आई होप अदर्स हैव एंजॉयड टू. इस मजमे में बहुत से नाम हैं जिनकी कुछ लोगों का नाम मैंने रफत को भेजा है कि उनको जरूर याद किया जाए कि भाई वो अपने कमेंट से नवाजें आपको और लोगों को आए. तो अब देखते हैं कि कोई लोग टिकते हैं कि नहीं टिकते हैं. अनीसुर रहमान साहब तो हैं ही, डॉक्टर प्रोफेसर आमिर मुफ्ती साहब हैं, वो भी मौजूद हैं, और भी रवि सिन्हा साहब हैं, और बहुत से लोग हैं इसमें. एक साहब ढाका से हैं, प्रोफेसर शाह आलम चौधरी साहब ढाका यूनिवर्सिटी से, वो भी शामिल हुए हैं आपको सुनने के लिए. तो बिफोर वी इंटर इनटू क्वेश्चन आंसर सेशन, रफत जरा जस्ट शो दी पोस्टर फॉर द कमिंग. भाई कमिंग सैटरडे को एक बहुत बड़ा नाम इंटरनेशनल स्टेज पे हैं, जो इंडिया के मामले में बहुत बड़े एक्सपर्ट माने जाते हैं, प्रोफेसर क्रिस्टोफर जेफर. And he also contributes regularly in Indian Express, but he's a real big name on Indian politics. So he is going to talk coming Saturday, introduced by Akar Patel Saab, who doesn't need any introduction. Neither the very famous Harshmandir Saab will be doing the concluding remark. So aap sab logon se darkhast hai ki please join them coming Saturday.